Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 3 Lessons Learned, an Agile Approach to Data Management. I'm Melissa Wissner, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. And before we get started, we have a few technical housekeeping items just to cover. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there's no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure that your volume is up. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. And if you'd like to download the slide deck, please click the orange handout button at the bottom of your screen. And time permitting, we'll follow the presentations with a Q&A session. So feel free to submit your questions using the question and answer tab on the left side of your screen. So I have a couple of great speakers joining me today. You can read the full bios on the left-hand side of your window by selecting the profile button on the bottom of your screen. And before we begin our discussion, we'll introduce ourselves. So please tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and what your company is doing in this space. Katrina, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Melissa. Hello, I'm Katrina Rice. I'm Executive Vice President of Professional Services at eClinical Solutions. At eClinical Solutions, we are a product and a data services company where we help biotech and pharma companies in the life sciences space manage and deploy their clinical trials through our data services and our technologies.
Great. And Amy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Wanamaker. I am leading up the data management activities at Neon Therapeutics. At Neon, we are a small biotech company focusing on personalized oncology, and we're located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have about 110 people working with us at the moment. And we have 3 rather complex phase 1 studies in the clinic at the moment.
Excellent. And as I mentioned earlier, my name is Melissa Wissner. I'm a Principal Engagement Consultant in the Strategic Consulting Services team at Medidata. We are a clinical and life sciences development software company headquartered in New York City. So why don't we jump right in here. The new reality, the reality that we all experience on a day-to-day basis across the industry and in clinical trials, and most certainly we feel it in data management, is that we are always in some form of startup mode. We're supporting rapidly changing trial designs, adaptive designs. We're responding to a multitude of protocol amendments and all the other real-time needs of studies, which requires data management teams to be incredibly effective and also efficient. In order to achieve these adaptable and scalable trial executions, we need to have a mindset change. And we also need to have a more flexible approach to data management, and that's more necessary than ever before. And so in today's webinar, we'll be discussing 3 key lessons learned when applying the Agile Development Methodology principles into your work in data management. And when we use the term Agile, we're referring to the software development approach that you may be familiar with. We use it at Medidata in our software development practices. It's a series of continuous short development cycles where you're coming up with a concept, you're developing that concept, testing it out to see if it works, and you keep moving along at a fast pace. This is very similar to what we see happening with trials today, and we're no longer in the model of the traditional sequential waterfall-like approach. And so what we'll be focusing in on is how you can evolve your organization to work in this new reality by designing flexible data acquisition strategies, by establishing a cross-functional team and processes, and by applying intelligent analytics to continuously assess your data quality and iterate accordingly. So let's dive into that first lesson. This one's around data acquisition. And Amy, I'll start with you. How has your data acquisition strategy and implementation of EDC or other tools changed to support a more agile approach to data management?
Sure, thanks, Melissa. So luckily for me, being the only data manager currently working at Neon, it's provided a great space to start from scratch, really. So I don't have to adapt older SOPs or working practices that were developed around the time of paper-based models. So with that being said, I'm able to use the capabilities and real database design strengths that our partners have at our CRO companies while designing our rather complex databases. So in that, our trials are small in patient number, but the complexity is pretty profound. We have a current standard of care that the patients will enroll onto, and then while they're in pre-treatment mode is what we call, behind the scenes, there's a lot of moving parts. So samples are flying back and forth. There's complex bioinformatics algorithms being run, all the while we are trying to manufacture that patient's personalized cancer therapy. So because of all the moving targets and moving pieces while setting up the design and trying to keep the data in a structured format, we've been able to come up with a rather interesting approach, in that we have basically two sets of schedule of events. We have the consistent model of the standard of care every 2-week dosing strategy with the respective safety assessments and dosing. And then we also have the more flexible design in which we target our drug to be available at week 12 based on sample flow, storms in Tennessee or what have you, that always doesn't be delivered at week 12. So for that reason, we have been able to come up with the approach to make those more flexible designed pages at the patient level. And so we use log forms. So our database comprises both the weekly scheduled assessments and also timeline-based, milestone-based. So we have pre-treatment assessments, dosing information, and that all pulled into the patient level. So it really has given us the ability for a flexible design, and it does about a 90% job of getting us to where we need to be. And then we also will always have some unscheduled events. But it has proven to be pretty successful for us and gets us to where we need to go with such a moving target.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense. Katrina, any other thoughts from your side?
Yeah, just to add to what Amy mentioned, for us at eClinical, when we're working with our clients to determine and understand their overall strategy and how they want to, what technologies they want to use, the shape and size of their organization, what's going to help them get to their end result very quickly and fast and be able to collect everything. And especially with the complexity of the trials, as Amy has mentioned, one of the things is that we like to always make sure that we encourage our clients and help them and coach them to think about the life cycle of your clinical trial and to make sure that your strategy and whatever tools you are looking to deploy from the acquisition perspective can support that. Because it's one thing to say, okay, I want to do X, but your tools won't allow you to do that, such as Amy is mentioning with, the complexity of the trials and being able to quickly change and customize the design to make sure that the collection is easy. You want to make sure that your acquisition tools and systems can support that as well, because as we're probably going to talk about throughout the course, being able to adapt and make changes really quickly with a live study requires you to, for example, make sure you can amend the data. So you want to make sure that your data strategy and all the tools from an acquisition perspective can actually support that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, and understanding, going across different organizations and different types of trials requires different types of strategies. So just in terms of thinking about that strategy, of course, non-EDC or external data definitely factors into thinking through that strategy. So I'm going to ask the question, how does that impact your approaches? How do you remain agile with so many different data types and volumes of data increasing at such a rapid rate? And, I can start us off here because I have some thoughts, and we've seen a number of organizations that we work with at Medidata that really struggle with the increasing amounts of external data. How do you manage it and clean it, especially using traditional data management approaches? And from the perspective of loading external data into EDC, we've seen the pendulum sometimes swings from one side to the other in terms of what's needed. Do we load some or all or none into EDC? And thinking about that strategy, Katrina, that you mentioned, the questions that we need to ask are around what is the data being used for? Is there value in having that data validated and doing some systematic reconciliation upon loading that data? And will that then drive efficiencies down the line? Of course, doing some upfront reconciliation can help, but we need to strike a balance. And ultimately, I think the data usage should drive where that data ultimately resides. And one other thought I had was just around working with more complex trials and managing that non-EDC data or the external data, especially in adaptive trials. When there's a lot of external data to manage from the data management perspective, we should always be trying to make sure that the right data is available to the right people at the right time in order to facilitate decision-making, real-time decision-making in those types of trials. And the data management role isn't necessarily anymore just setting up CRFs and edit checks. We really should be at the center of that role, facilitating the data, owning the data, and having a main point of contact on the trial team to help bridge some of those functional teams, the cross-functional teams, can help communicate and be a liaison across the teams. And I've seen that really helps that real-time decision-making and managing all of that non-EDC data that we now deal with. Katrina, did you have any additional thoughts around that?
Yeah, so what we're seeing the exact same thing, that the volume of external data that's coming in at this into the trials that we work on is more than we've ever seen. We have some studies that have 10, 15 external data providers that are providing data. And so what is becoming more critical that we're even seeing is for our data managers to really liaise and be that central point to make sure all this external data gets in and it gets managed. And as you mentioned, you want to be mindful to think about where does it make the most sense to put this data. And what we're finding is that the majority, it doesn't make sense to load it into the EDC. And then there's also a timing issue as well, because some of these very complex trials have a specialized data. And so that data is not necessarily fitting to go into EDC. So then you need to be thinking about, well, what other technologies are you going to be using to manage this external data? And so the days of, getting an external file and you're waiting and you're even reconciling that just in SAS and getting some SAS listings isn't actually keeping you on the cutting edge as well, because people now really want to use this external data in the management and the life of the trial. So at eClinical, and as I mentioned, we are a product and a services company. So we actually have our own clinical data hub where we're actually set up some really nice processes to push this external data into that data hub, and we're able to kind of fold it into the life cycle of all the other trials. So we're able to reconcile that and have smart exception listings that are produced out. And we're actually seeing clear evidence that that actually is increasing the quality of the data and allowing all key stakeholders to not only just be focused on their EDC data, but they're also these specialized lab vendors and data so that we can actually roll it in. And the last point is it also helps us be able to do that ongoing reconciliation of the patient, because most people really want to be able to be cleaning and looking at the patient ongoing. And if you have 10, 15, or even so much external data, you can't deem a patient clean without having that data ongoing. So it's actually in the life of the trials that we're seeing, the external data is actually, we saying, taking over some of just the traditional EDC data that you would in general see. So the data manager's role is really increased in that they really need to be much more analytical, understanding a lot of these complex lab vendors and the type of data that they're going to be dealing with, because they need to actually be able to clean that data and be able to give some information to all key stakeholders on the status of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. I see that trend. It's a clear trend in the industry, and especially in data management, for sure. So another question that comes up, Amy, is there a component of EDC or other tools that requires more upfront planning and configuration in order to minimize the downstream impacts when changes occur? I know in your space you're having to be really flexible and manage lots of changes throughout the course of any individual trial. So what steps are you taking to manage that risk?
Sure. So I know every company has different reporting structures, and so I think I'm pretty fortunate to be able to be reporting up into bioinformatics. So my group is really able to see the big picture. So when we start off a trial, we kind of get into a room, we get in front of the whiteboard, and we do data sample mapping and just try to figure out where the samples are going and who needs the information, who are all the key stakeholders. And we try to standardize even things that seem small, that allow us to be able to pick something up in transit, know what study it belongs to, what study sites. So right from the beginning, we've standardized different clinical sites. Whether or not they're on each of our trial, it doesn't matter. So, MGH is always 2102, something like that. So at every study, if we know that we've received samples, we know which site they've come from. We can easily identify which patients they belong to, which trials they belong to, and that has allowed us to really streamline the startup. So we have the third party, the centralized lab that houses in all of our samples and helps us execute. But each trial may utilize a different third party. So by standardizing our sample numbers and seeing which things are overkill and underkill, and by really doing that sample tracking on the whiteboard, that exercise really helps us see where we need consistency, things like tumor block IDs. Do we need to renumber those? The site already has a numbering system in-house. Can we use theirs? And just to see that, we can. That's one less thing we need for them to change from their daily workflow. And working with the sites and knowing what their in-house systems and processes for sample tracking is a big component in our trials, because we can't begin manufacturing the patient's vaccine until we have the tumor biopsy. So we need to be able to make it easy for the sites to collect the biopsy, get it to us so that we can begin processing it. So for us, having that, all of that framework set up, because as we talked about a couple minutes ago with the non-EDC data, we have direct channels set up between different data platforms to talk to us so that we can aid in the communication between vendors and between our manufacturing site. And so that allows us to help out the manufacturing so that they know and can help plan how many vaccines will be in progress at one point. So really the setup for us is communication and getting everyone into a room. And if it's not happening, as a data manager, I'll set the meeting up. So I think the data manager really has to see how that flow will come into our database and really take ownership of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. I think oftentimes that upfront planning and communication, getting people in one room or one virtual room, thinking through all of those risks and then ultimately having data management own that is very similar to some key success factors that I've seen in implementations that we've had through Medidata. I can think of two quick examples. One is in the use of our configurable RTSM tool, our randomization and trial supply management module. That really, it gives us the ability to manage complex designs and adaptive design, and it does require a good bit of proactive thinking, though. And so it's not just about the configurability or programming. Of course, you need to get that piece right, but it's really about the people, which is what you were saying. And in order to be successful with it, we need to get all the key folks in the same room or in discussions with data managers and supply managers, operations. Getting everybody's buy-in at the beginning really leads to the success. And if that's not happening, I fully agree that data management should be the ones leading the charge on pulling people together. And then just the second example was around our safety gateway module, which also requires a lot of upfront planning and teams getting together and communicating, identifying risks, and building out processes very similar to what you've described around sending data from EDC to a safety system. And oftentimes when we have our initial workshops, it's the first time that data management teams are sitting in the same room as the safety teams. And breaking down those silos is really impactful in being able to be efficient, down the line. So fully agree with you on those points. Katrina, did you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, so in addition to what you guys have mentioned about just the upfront planning of the tools that you want to actually use, one of the things that we at eClinical, being a service provider, is even taking a step up, that before we even start to be in the middle of working a trial, is helping our clients start these upfront planning at the start of new contracts or requests for proposals, so that you can really think about, okay, because we all like technology, most of us, and we like bells and whistles, but we really have to think about how do they fit in the life of your organization and how much timing, because some of the mistakes that we've seen clients will attempt to do is implement safety gateway on a trial that has a really critical timeline. And that probably isn't the best, because you do need to bring all the key stakeholders together and make sure that everybody understands their role, especially as some of these technologies that you mentioned, Melissa's with RTSM, one of the things we definitely found, it is you need a lot of more key stakeholders. You need trial supply management. You need biospecs. You need all these parties to come together and make sure that they understand the complete flow of what's going to happen with deploying these technologies. And then finally, also is thinking about not just the technologies that you're going to be using, but in addition to when you're building out your acquisition or your collection. And for example, what are some of the metrics you want to get out of the collection tools, or even some of the analytics that you want to feed after? That planning needs to be thought about, because it should drive even maybe how you're collecting the data or how you're going to do certain things. Because one of the things that we've found is, and we're Medidata partners, so we do use their technologies. For example, with missing pages. And everybody loves, data managers love, everybody wants to know, how am I going to determine missing pages? Well, understanding and planning out how am I going to design my data collection system to actually make sure that I can get those metrics out of the system. And there's a number of different things you can do in the technology to provide you that information. So you just kind of need to, and we understand that the timelines for everything is quite aggressive, but it's good to, if you go back to our first question, when you think about your data acquisition strategy, to kind of think about not just the tools you're going to use, but the processes and what are some of the end results you want to get out of the data, such as the metrics and things for your key stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually leads us into our second lesson learned here around establishing a cross-functional trial team and thinking through those bigger, wider processes and workflows. And so our first question, Katrina, maybe you can expand again just around how does data governance work in your organization, and what is data management's role in defining and documenting and managing that data governance?
Yep, perfect. So again, as a data services provider, we have governance for how within eClinical we're going to manage our clients' data, which in some cases, it could be different. So we need to, from our organization, make sure that we have a collaborative cross-functional team from the services folks, which includes data management, in addition to collaboration with our IT department to make sure that securities and, data privacy, all that stuff is taken care of. So for within our organization, data management is a key stakeholder and driver of that, because they are what I like to call the data steward on behalf of our clients, because I describe to them at the end of the day who is going to be signing off on the database lock. It's you. You're going to own to say this data is ready. It's been taken care of. So the data manager's role in it is actually one of the key drivers. And within our organization, is very important that for each of our clients, that the data representatives from data management that works on that is actually collaborating with our IT function, our QA function, to make sure that if it's something unique, for example, and a strategy for a particular client, that we're actually covering that, and we have our live quality processes and checkpoints in place. So it's even within our company, it's a cross-functional organization. So I've been on the sponsor side of a company, so I definitely understand it's similar in that as well. Maybe Amy, from your perspective, you can kind of give your perspective of how that governance would actually go in a small company.
Well, sure, and it's, at a small company, things change pretty quickly, or they have the ability to. So the last time we chatted, maybe in October or November, my experience with data governance was a little bit less. So in the months since, we have started working with IT to establish more data governance and identify who needs access to the data. And then beyond that, just who's using the data, how are we getting the data. Starting small, we had different generic users set up that could write to data sources, and we were sharing them maybe between vendors, and it was easy. So the more that we are getting bigger, the more complex our trials are, the more teams we're working with, and it has become more apparent that data management definitely is the right person to kind of really become a key stakeholder and know where the data is coming from, how it's being stored, and who is accessing it. So it's been really an interesting part for me to get involved in and learn, because maybe a year ago I wouldn't have known that data managers would play a key role in data governance. But at a small company, things move rather quickly, and it's exciting to become part of that and really take ownership of that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great progress in just a few months. So just thinking through, some of the more process focused topics here. What do we think is the best approach for data cleaning and data review? We have, often a couple of camps of people in our industry. Some folks think of continuous and ongoing versus focused on data cuts or specific points in time. And from my perspective, I think as an Agile data management team and teams, we really need to take into account both, obviously, the continuous cleaning so that once you get to a data cut or milestone or a key point in time, you're obviously not dealing with a mountain of issues to dig through. But I also think that one key in making your data cleaning and data review to go well is a well-written plan, right? A well-written data management plan, data review plan. And as we get more sophisticated in our cleaning processes and using more and better analytics and different expanded tool sets, our teams, different teams are getting involved earlier in the process. I think it's really vital that each team knows their scope of review and we're not stepping on each other's toes, but also more importantly that we're not missing anything or have any gaps, especially with all of the vast amounts of data and data types that we know are out there and depending on your trial can be pretty complex. So of course we want to make sure we're not doing duplicate work, but I think that a key thing that needs to be well defined in your plan, in your data review plan, is to ensure that we're not having that overlap or the gap as well. So Amy, any thoughts there? As an N of one, maybe there's not as much overlap, but.
Well, yes, I think I'll go back to communication again. I think it's the biggest factor here, and meaning that it's important to know. So for a phase 1 study, an oncology study, that study can go on for years, hopefully, we hope. And if that's the case, we may have a site that has enrolled perhaps 2 screen fail patients or 1 patient that discontinued early, and they are, the enrollment is closed, they're trying to clean out space, they want to close their site, but there are samples that haven't been reconciled. So it's really a balance, and it's making sure that you have your ears open during team meetings and that you can shift priorities and make sure that everything happens when it needs to. So I think it's a combination of milestone-based cleaning and per patient cleaning. Like you said, I think a well-written plan is really important. So what we're trying to do here at NEON is come up with a company-level document that will identify what specific tasks should be performed prior to investigator brochure updates or prior to releasing data at a scientific conference and different milestones like that, and just make sure that we've hit all of the key milestone-based data review types. And then also from the sponsor side, we don't want to redo everything that we have paid the CRO to do. So we want to do more spot checks, more metric review, more query review, making sure that the edit checks are working appropriately, and look for trends really, and just try to tighten things up as we go along. So for us from the sponsor side, I would say it's more continuous and real-time review based on the efficacy and keeping things up to date, knowing big picture, and being able to communicate at first knowledge of an upcoming deliverable. So we have to ensure that there's a good relationship if we're using CROs as outsourced, so that we know that everyone's on the same page and that it's just a waste of time and resources. So one thing that we've used in data cleaning is just to ensure we're using smart edit checks. So want to overburden the sites with edit checks and queries if something is just a little bit out of window. So we leave that type of review to the medical monitor, and we ensure that the medical monitor is trained in review and knows what to look for. But that way, we're not firing a query if a temperature is 1 degree out of range. So it's a balance of I would say.
Yep, definitely. Agreed. So another question for all of us, thinking about the evolution of the skill set of the data manager as we expand our need to be more flexible and to look at more and more different types of data and larger quantities of data. I would say it's quite a hot topic now, thinking about the skill sets required and thinking about how our teams are working in this agile model. There's obviously a clear need to find the right people that are a key. From all the way from the beginning, we talked about, defining our data acquisition strategy all the way through analyzing our data through the analytics. So Katrina, what are your thoughts on finding the right skill sets?
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. So it's clear listening to, well, it appears to be clear listening to all that we've talked about, that some of the necessary skill sets and of the data manager needs to really evolve more into an analytical, somewhat technical resource that can help and someone that clearly understands the life cycle, the end-to-end process of a clinical trial. Because if they're going to lead the efforts to think about the strategy you're going to want to deploy, how data, all these different data sources, they actually need to have some of that insight into actually doing that. Now, finding those resources, I think, this market is overwhelming with excellent expertise. And some of it, you're going to also need to have strategies and thoughts on how you develop it, which is the opportunity for data managers, our traditional data managers, to actually extend themselves. So some of that's going to be definitely I like to think about also thinking outside of the box. So you are looking at resources that you may have never thought or has a background that could actually transition or move into this data management kind of role that we want to evolve, as well as we're looking at making sure that we have training and processes that develop, because we want to retain people that are in the industry, and we want to give those that are looking to increase or change their skill set some growth and some training behind that. So it's more, I think, yes, we have a huge opportunity to actually reshape the folks that are in that role, to help those that, have that desire and the want to kind of reshape themselves to be more into that more analytical, technical role, and as well as, looking for these new graduates that are coming out that you have to start thinking sometimes necessarily their background or degree may not be, those fits that you would think could actually fit in a data manager role, but they actually could evolve into that. So we're looking at different ways to, make sure that we grow and retain our staff, but make sure we also give them opportunities to utilize their skill set to the different levels that we need to be able to support this agile, approach that we want to deploy out here.
Yeah, completely agree, and I think it's an interesting thought on thinking outside the box. That's what we often need to do as we're trying to be more flexible and support these different types of needs. That we absolutely have to be doing that. So, Amy, any other thoughts to add here?
Well, just briefly, I think I may have mentioned communication skills once or twice. I believe that's the cornerstone of a successful data manager, just being able to really understand the role and being able to see the big picture and communicate. And coming from a small company perspective, it's important to really help other members of the team, which may be new to industry. It may be a new medical monitor coming from a site that hasn't worked in a clinical trial and from the sponsor side. So being able to be patient and educating other team members on what data manager's role is. So I think coming in as a new data manager, just trying to understand big picture concepts of where data management fits into the clinical trial team is really important.
Yep, completely agree. Okay. So with that, let's move into our third lesson learned around intelligent analytics and, of course, our data quality, which is our main focus. So let's start, Katrina, with a question for you around what are the key analytics that tend to be the most important to the data management function? And how in your organization are those gathered and tracked and shared, and how are they supporting an agile approach?
Yes. So, of course, operational metrics, anything that is around just where site entry is all the way through to where cleaning is and the cleanliness of that patient. And in addition to activities that lead toward them getting a patient clean. So operational metrics are really, really big. In addition to operational metrics, some of the other metrics that are key as a part of our data cleaning strategy is the safety, analytics all around safety, like, lab reporting and those things are actually also important because those lead to, SAEs and notifications. So operational things that are related to the safety of the patient, in addition to being able to look, because we have multiple projects or studies for a single client. So that overall how's the overall program doing, which would also be operational. So operational metrics at a study level as well to a program level are very critical for us to do tracking and, of where the study is so that we know and we can resource it properly. We can continue to support the ongoing cleaning as well. Oh, those are some of the ones that, come to mind that are really important. What I'm seeing the team say that they need to actually, make sure that they have insight and they have at their hand. And that also allows them to, us to support this agile approach. So, for example, if we're looking at operational metrics and we see a particular site for some reason is having an expended number of queries on a particular or driving for some edit checks, that leads us to rethink and work with our sponsors to say, okay, is it something in particular about this? Is some retraining or confusion on how we built something? Sites are just not getting it because we can see that in the performance. So having analytics, you're able to do that even more now than you ever. Those things weren't easily trackable as they are now. And it also, again, supports this approach so that if we need to make a quick change in the database, we can because we can see it from there.
Yep, I completely agree. I think having some more sophisticated statistical analytic tools and signals that can help identify performance issues with sites earlier is very key in increasing the quality of your data earlier on. And so that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, using the statistical analytics to get to that point faster. I fully agree. So just going on that topic around operational metrics, Amy, for you, as you're managing your portfolio of studies, what are some indicators that something might need attention, or how are you optimizing your time around operational analytics or operational metrics?
Right. So around the operational metrics, it's really, for me, being able to pop across the different studies and see quickly during a study meeting that we're up to date. So we also have developed in-house a milestone tracker so that we can see if data has been entered and if it's on track or not. So that allows us to keep on up to date on the quality of the data and if there's site performance issues. So I really love the data, the intelligent data analytics, and not just operationally, but more of the I can go into different graphs and see outliers and just identify the quality of the data quickly and see if a site has all of a sudden switched from centimeters to millimeters. It jumps out at you. So seeing different plots and having a couple of key analytical tools that I can just run across the data and consolidate all the data across 3 studies at once and see them all on a graph. It's been really helpful and helped to streamline site communication too, because you can really see if one site's kind of going off on all of the studies, having, again, that pre-built-in standardization, it helps.
Yeah, makes sense. Great. So just thinking about expanding on the metrics and analytics, Katrina, what are your thoughts around how the role of the data manager has changed over time in defining those metrics and analytics?
The data manager I'm seeing really is the key driver, as Amy kind of spoke about, in defining what those metrics and analytics are, even across the different stakeholders. They actually, guide that discussion and should be driving, in my opinion, that discussion of, okay, what are the metrics that need to be collected and what are the analytics? And that all wraps around your data review strategy as well, because you don't want multiple people stepping over to each other trying to review. So having the data manager be that focal point that actually helps to determine what metrics are needed, what review is being done by each stakeholder, allows you to have one kind of owner of pulling all that information together. And they can also give recommendations, for example, to the medical monitor, maybe, or some additional things that they may think about looking at, or if data management is already covering, maybe these are things that medical monitors may not look at during this review cycle. So I think the data manager actually owns and should be driving that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. So one last question for everyone before we move into the question and answer section. So based on all that we've discussed and the lessons we've gone through, what are some of the key takeaways in your organizations as you apply the Agile software development principles to data management? And I think I've heard a couple of main themes as we've been talking through all of these lessons. Just from a best practice and recommendation perspective, I think the first one that I've heard is really empowering a person or naming a person that can be tasked with cross-functional communication and data sharing. So having that person own the data and manage the communication and ensure that communication is happening allows us to break down some of the silos that we traditionally have in place. And often it makes sense for that person to be from data management, and that's what we've heard quite a bit across all of our discussions today. And they need to have a strong leadership profile, and we can develop them to work towards that. It's a good development opportunity. And then the second takeaway or theme that I've heard is the incorporation of more statistical, sophisticated analytic tools that help to bridge some of our complex data types and data volumes. They tend to be difficult to get our arms around, but I think the key is not just adopting the technology, but adapting the processes to ensure that we're covering everything and ensuring data quality. So those are just my initial thoughts. Amy, how about you?
Yeah, sure, Melissa. So to build on that, don't fear throwing away the spreadsheets. I think we may not have the ability to, but if you can bring things back to the whiteboard and start rehashing things and ensuring, and if you think from study budget and you're trying to harness in a new data platform or new analytics, it's really our job to say why they're important, why we need to review differently, why we need to do things better, more efficient, possibly with less people, and to really be that kind of cheerleader and to get buy-in across teams and work forward and liaise with the statisticians and with the protocol reviewers and just make sure that we get a seat at that table and have our voice heard so that it makes our lives better. Less database modifications, more things clarified up front. So just being in it from the beginning, I think.
Yep, absolutely. And Katrina, how about you?
Yeah, just in kind of when I think about it, goes back, I know the kind of old saying, the people, the process, and the technology. So you want to make sure in this approach that we are developing, we're attracting, we're growing the people that we have in the roles and attracting new ones to be able to work in this different model. So the people absolutely can't do anything about the people. And then overall processes to really sit down and think about your data governance, your data strategy. What do you want to look at? And thinking about the key stakeholders, how you want to use that across the board. And then, of course, the technology and what's evident in what we talked about. You want to make sure you have technologies, because one technology may not cover everything, and that's pretty clear, but you want to make sure that you do have technologies that can work together and actually be able to support this approach, this agile, flexible, fast-moving approach. So it's a combination of all three that still remains the same when we think about just the people, the process, and the technology. It's just a reshaping of all those three components to fit in this agile approach.
Great. Completely agree. Okay, excellent discussion, everybody. So now we're going to move into our Q&A session. There is still time to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we already have lots of great questions. I think we have time for a few of them, so we'll try to get to as many as possible. The first question that I see here is, are you able, and I think, Katrina, this is probably for you, are you able to perform reconciliation of external data sources in your data hub, or do you find that standard SAS reconciliation is still required?
No, thank you. We're able to perform that reconciliation within our data hub. We program smart exception listings right in the hub, and then those discrepancies appear, and the data manager can take action right there, and the action could be, okay, I need to post the issue or process the issue for the external vendor. I need to post a query, and Raves to know you're able to do that right within that platform.
Great. Excellent. Okay. And then for the next one, I think, Amy, maybe you can start to give your thoughts and we can add on. But this is more around the database design aspects that you had mentioned earlier. So the question is, can we hear more about database design aspects that help support flexibility in collecting the data? Any other tips other than what you had mentioned earlier around log forms at the parent level?
Oh, okay, definitely. So another thing that we have been able to use is the dynamic functionalities. So we have our general phase 1 oncology octopus study with multiple arms, and so we have used different fields that will trigger different dynamic casebook features at the patient level. So we have a cohort arm, one simple variable that we use to branch off the treatment-related pages. And then with that, it also branches off different options on our adverse event forms. So that really customizes and tailors each subject's casebook to that patient, and it allows for a cleaner data entry situation for the sites. And we also have, because our design is can go off of the 12-week schedule, we utilize a separate form that asks if the patient will continue to the next visit. So if they say yes, they will continue to the next visit, then that will dynamically add the next treatment milestone section. So we've kind of built in separate folder level structures to pass the patient from one milestone to another, and that has really been helpful.
Excellent. Katrina, anything to add to that, or maybe we should just try and squeeze in one more question here.
No.
Okay, great. We have a few more minutes. I think this will be our last question. Has your approach to using more analytics changed the way the traditional approach to edit checking? We know edit checks take a lot of time and resources. Has that approach changed? So, Katrina, any thoughts there?
Yes, for us it has, because we know in some of the instances we are. So when our data managers very quickly put together the data validation specification and look at their review, they determine based on that review whether that would be like an edit check or whether that review will be covered in the analytics. So yes, and actually we are pushing I am and my data managers to really even do a more thorough look at that to say, is this edit check really going to give you what you're looking for, or would an analytics? So instead of just defaulting it to be an edit check, for them to really think about, does it make more sense to look at this in a different way? So yes, for us, it is actually driving a different mindset on how we deploy the databases. In addition, in order to really get to this fast, aggressive deployment of your collection systems, we have no choice but to be forced to evaluate the amount of edit checks that you're putting in the system, because you can't have it both ways. You can't have a study that has thousands of edit checks and then want it deployed quickly with the quality that we need to have. So yes, it is actually, analytics is actually driving the way we're thinking about, even from a collection perspective, how we're going to collect the data, because we know we're going to review it in a different fashion where we would have used the edit check, but now we're either going to use an exception listing or we're going to use the analytics. So yes, for us it is.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. And I'm seeing the same on our side as we're implementing our statistical analytic tool, CSA, Centralized Statistical Analytics. We've found that many organizations are really asking those questions. How can we deploy faster? How can we be more efficient and streamlined in our edit checks? Because we know that, or we have confidence that the statistical analytics will be catching that. So do we need to build it in at first? And so what I'm seeing is very much a risk-based kind of phased approach to culling back the edit checks, or trying to parse them down a little bit further, right? So we're starting with some obvious ones, and then as we gain confidence and maturity with our processes and the data management teams get more confident with it, then we can start removing more of those complex ones, because we know that we'll find them in the statistical analytics downstream. So definitely a very similar experience on our side. So I think that will be our final question. We did have a lot of great questions submitted today, but we couldn't get to them all. We'll try our best to get back to everyone that submitted personally after the webinar. And thank you for attending this Fierce Markets webinar and submitting so many great questions. Thanks, Katrina and Amy, for participating with me. and this webinar has been recorded. You'll be able to access the recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. So thank you again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.